Good evening, everyone. If I could get the councillors to get to their seats, please. If we could have some quiet, please. I trust everyone can actually hear me tonight, please. Welcome to the August 26th regular meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Skye Snellgrove. The question period sign-up sheet is on the partition wall near the gallery at either end. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet, and at the start of question period I'll call up those who've signed to the podium to address Council. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Snellgrove, we have a number.
Thank you. Agenda item 10D, OCP Amendment Application, OCP 89, and Rezoning Application RA 395-388 McCleary Street. Add the following delegations: Lawrence Reaper, Dr. Eric Norman. Agenda item 14A, Councillor Bonner, motion regarding commercial properties along bus routes. Replace wording of motion and add delegation from Bill Manners. And then add agenda item 13A, notice of motion from Councillor Bonner.
And just to confirm, the delegation for Mr. Manners, that is with respect to item 14A?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, a motion for approval of the agenda is amended. Councillor Hemmens, seconded. Councillor Thorpe, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The minutes have been circulated. A motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated.
So moved.
Councillor Thorpe, seconded. Councillor Hemmens, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The Mayor's report. I have a number of things to report on tonight. Given what has happened recently in the community, a news release was distributed from Chief Fry of our fire department, encouraging everyone to ensure that they have smoke alarms installed in their homes. In 2018 alone, only 28% of the home fires in Nanaimo had a working smoke alarm. So this is a very serious safety concern for this community. On average, I'm informed that there are less than 3 minutes to escape a house fire, which is why a working smoke alarm is so important. Research has proven that individuals have a 73% greater chance of dying in a fire if they don't have a working smoke alarm, and homes should be have them installed with at least one smoke alarm per floor and outside each sleeping area. Summer is a busy time, and so there is a temporary closure on Departure Bay Road, which some of you may have discovered. Commencing Monday, August 19th, crews working from the City of Nanaimo started a slope stabilization project on Departure Bay Road, and during this time, Departure Bay Road between Newton and Little John Way will be closed and a detour in place. The work is planned to take 2 weeks, and the road is expected to be open for the end of August. With respect to preventable fires, a reminder to everyone, the Nanaimo Fire Rescue is launching a new awareness campaign to draw the community's attention to how quickly a fire from a tossed cigarette can spread. In the summer months when the ground is dry, fire crews respond to numerous preventable fires started by the improper disposal of cigarettes. So far this year, Nanaimo Fire Rescue has attended 37 brush fires this year. 37. So for those who are listening, I would caution you to take the advice of Meshal, our fire prevention officer. We have extended the deadline for membership in the Environment Committee. Applications will be accepted until August 30th, 2019. The Environment Committee established by Council will focus on providing policy direction to meet the objectives under the Environmental Responsibility Priority in Council's 2019-2022 Strategic Plan. The term of office for the Environment Committee position is 2 years, ending December 31st, 2022, or as directed by Council. And I'm asking and inviting interested residents to submit a completed application form by 4:30 on Friday, August the 30th to Legislative Services, 455 Wallace Street, Nanaimo, V9R 5J6, or email legislative.servicesoffice@nanaimo.ca. And hopefully the committee is expected to begin meeting in the fall of 2019. And finally, as has been noted by the correspondence received by Council and Mayor, we have had some delays in waste collection. Combination of mechanical and additional pressures on the sanitation section caused the delays, and city sanitation crews worked over the weekend to get collections back on schedule. A new fire truck, a new collection truck is under order. It won't be here for quite a while yet, but 8 trucks, just so all of you understand, provide service to nearly 30,000 homes. I can tell you, if I'm not mistaken, and I know the CEO will correct me, we have seen something in the range, or Mr. Sims will, a 90% reduction in terms of injuries for that particular crew. So this has been a substantial benefit to the hardworking people who work for this city and will lead to a reduction in our WCB premiums. Finally, a section of Bruce Avenue is to be closed for street upgrades, local traffic only between 5th and 6th. The start date has been changed from August 20th to August 26th, and between 5th and 6th, Bruce will be closed from traffic from August 26th to September 13th for road upgrading. And finally, and most importantly, this city employs 900 full-time employees. And when you work with one another, you become part of a large family. On Friday, August the 9th, Tim Ripka passed away suddenly at his home. He was an asphalt equipment operator that had been with us since 2008. He was a good all-around worker who cared about all those around him. He was bright and friendly and extremely popular with all his workmates. On behalf of Council and the citizens of Nanaimo, we extend our deepest sympathies to his wife Lisa, daughter Tabor, and his family. And sadly, over the weekend, I was notified that Mike Rogers, a long-term sanitation worker, passed away on Saturday, August 24th, after battling cancer for over a year. He had been with the city since 2009. Notwithstanding that he had been incredibly fit and played basketball with many friends and co-workers, he was a hard worker, was one of the heavy lifters in manual collection when we were doing it, and had a reputation for slinging 2 cans at a time. His dad, Dan Rogers, is a retired captain with the Nanaimo Fire and Rescue, and Mike had been on an on-call firefighter prior to going to Public Works. On behalf of the Council and the citizens of Nanaimo, we wish to extend our deepest sympathies to his girlfriend Francine, his stepson Donovan, and to his entire family. We thank these men for their service to our city. They represented very well the core competencies that the city strives for in their employees. Both were wonderful, caring, responsible individuals. They will be sadly missed but not forgotten, and to their families, we share your grief and hope you find comfort in the memories that you carry with them. It's not an easy report to read, and a pretty tough week for the people who work for this city. We have no presentations, no delegations other than those mentioned with respect to specific items. A motion for adoption of the consent items, item 9. Councillor Turley.
I don't know if it's appropriate at this time, Your Worship, but I'd like to have further discussion on the item 2 under the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting, number 1, downtown Nanaimo Key Opportunities. So if we could remove that from the consent items.
So that's item B, under item B2.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Number 1.
Yes, number 1. All right, a seconder for the motion. Absent that, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor for adoption of consent items? Opposed? Motion carries.
My
Councillor
turn.
Turley.
Yes, thank you. When we discussed this at the Governance and Priorities Committee on the item regarding cutting the lane off at the Cenotaph, I had asked a question at the time how that would affect large truck traffic trying to enter the downtown, making deliveries, and I hadn't heard a reply to that yet, and I wonder if Mr. Sims had time to. I know you've been busy with other things, but.
Mr. Sims.
Your Worship, thank you. It's a good question, and I apologize for not getting back to council on following up. That will impact truck traffic, but often truck traffic will go the other way coming up from Commercial, or I should say from the Island Highway along Commercial. So it's not anticipated to be a major concern.
Okay.
The turn onto Front Street is easily made as well.
Okay. And the second point is redevelopment of other areas in the downtown. I'm trying to remember what the actual, we were discussing. Were there specific properties, or was it just redevelopment in general? I don't know who, maybe it was Mr. Lindsay that...
Your Worship, I think there was a whole menu of items that were discussed at that time. Some of were examples of things that we can work on. I think the plan was for staff to initiate some of that work and then report back to council, and certainly to be further opportunities if council wanted to investigate other options in the downtown.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I have a motion then to approve the item 2? Thank you, Councillor Turley, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Under reports, liquor license application number LA 139-245 Fraser Street. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Worship. As you mentioned, the first item under reports is a liquor license application at 245 Fraser Street. Council will be familiar with this. There was a previous application that came just notifying you of this application. Since that time, it's been circulated to the neighboring property, so we circulate within 100 meters. We've received 3 responses, all in favor of extending the hours to 1 a.m. And as noted in the report, this is in keeping with the hours of service policy that we have in the downtown for our liquor establishments. There is a location plan of the subject property on page 46 of your agenda.
Thank you very much. There is a motion.
I'll move the recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion on this? Everyone's had a chance to read the material. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. The next item is Housing Agreement -337 Robson Street. Again, Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This application may also look familiar to Council in that you approved a development permit for the subject property back in April. As outlined in this report, there was a number of items that the applicant chose to proceed with in order to receive density bonusing on the property, and those items are outlined in the report. The majority of those items are secured either through covenants or conditions in the building permit. However, when you are limiting tenureship on a property, it must be done through a housing agreement and a bylaw adopted by Council. So in this case, we're recommending that the restriction on maintaining 50% of the units as rental for 10 years would be done by a housing agreement, and that Council proceed with the associated bylaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I'd like to move housing agreement bylaw 2019, number 7291, to authorize a housing agreement for 31-unit multiple family rental housing building at 337 Robson Street, pass first reading.
Seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I'd like to move housing agreement bylaw 2019, number 7291, pass second reading.
Seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Contrary? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move housing agreement bylaw 2019, number 7291, pass third reading.
Seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Move council direct staff to register a covenant to reinforce the terms of the housing agreement.
Seconded Councillor Thorpe. Again, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is item 10C, rezoning application number RA 372-2379 Browns Lane. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, this is a rezoning application for the subject property, 2379 Browns Lane, and this is very close or near to the intersection of Labio and Bowen. There is a location plan on page 63 of your agenda and an air photo on page 68 to provide you some context. If successfully rezoned, the property would be rezoned from R1 to Core 1 in order to permit a 27-unit multifamily development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. I understand we have a delegation, Jack Anderson from Green Plan. Mr. Anderson, I'll ask you to introduce yourself. It's all right. I'll ask you to introduce yourself. You can see the lighting in front of you. I'm going to hit start. You'll have 5 minutes, and at 4 minutes, the light will change from green to orange.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Please,
Thank you,
thank
Council,
you.
for listening to us here. My name is Jack Anderson. I have a company called Green Plan. I'm representing the Brown family that has lived on the property since the mid-1960s. Roland and Frida Brown owned the property. Unfortunately, they both passed away in recent years, and their sons, Pat and Mike, have now asked me to move forward to see if we could get the best opportunity for the development of the property. Their concern is that we do something that's right for the neighborhood as they lived there all their lives. I checked the official community plan. The official community plan supports a medium-density multifamily development on that property based on corridor designation. So we moved forward with that in 2016 to create a zoning amendment for the property. Move to this next slide here. And so this is a bit of an aerial view. You can see the center area, and I apologize, I had forgotten to bring my laser pointer, and I see that the administrative staff here didn't have one either. So the center section is where that property is. You can see 2 cars parked in front of the old house right there. To the left is a townhouse development. We have some very limited development on Bowen Road, which is immediately to the left again from there, and you can see Bowen Road right there. So that's how close we are to the main traffic corridors. I went with development to consider a multifamily development. We met with city staff. We were given some direction. We proceeded to create a concept for it. Unfortunately, the staff that had provided some direction had moved on from the city, and subsequent staff didn't support that. That meant that we had to go back and reconsider. And the good news is that I think it was a wise decision, because the previous staff had encouraged us to put all the traffic on Brackenwood as opposed to Labio. We subsequently changed our concept, and we're now coming out with all the traffic onto Labio. That meant we had to do a traffic study, and then that was followed by civil engineering. So that's part of the delay in getting to the point that we're at right now. This is a picture looking down on the site. The location is very central in the neighborhood to a lot of amenities, and that's a very valuable thing the way we see it for development. It is very pedestrian friendly. We are 5 minutes from Bevan Park Recreation. We're 3 minutes to a bus stop. From that bus stop, you're 13 minutes to Vancouver Island University. Quality Foods is 11-minute walk down the road, and if you go the other way, Country Club is 12 minutes, and there's a school within 13 minutes walk. The critical piece in here is you can look at the L-shaped townhouse development immediately to the right in there, and you'll notice a large tract of trees that was retained as an open green space. We think that's terrific. We would like to capture that because the Browns property has trees in that location as well. The property and the image on the right is provided there to show the topography of the site. So the top of the property, or the top of that illustration, is Labio. The bottom corner is Brackenwood. You'll notice that it's steeper at the top of the property than it is through the middle. That worked out to be our advantage in terms of how we could design the property, and I'll come back to that point in a moment. The site concept is illustrated on the left. What we ended up considering is that all the traffic comes in and out at Labio
1 minute,
Road.
Mr. Brown, and I'm fairly ruthless about time.
Okay, we'll move quick. There is a link partway down that goes into the properties to the left, which is very important for future development of those as corridor development as well. And only emergency vehicles will exit onto Brackenwood, and hopefully we don't have any need for them. We have a two-way road and a lot of parking. That took away a lot of our green space, but we were very happy to capture that one area in the middle where the trees were so that we have a nice open space that ties in with the pedestrian walkway. We have 3 buildings planned. They are two that are 3 stories and one that is 4 stories. And because of that topography, we're able to do that without any variances. These buildings are about 2,500 square feet, so therefore they're about the size of an average house on Brackenwood. And yet we have 3 suites in here that range in size from 520 to about 840 square feet with an average of 720. There are 30
Thank you,
units in
Mr.
total
Brown.
rather
We're-
than 27.
You're at the red light. I'm going to ask if council has any questions. Councillor Armstrong,
Thank you.
please.
Just for clarification, you said that all traffic is going to be accessing from Labio? Because in my report, I have Browns Lane.
Browns Lane is a pedestrian access along that one side. It is pedestrian only. Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you, so,
There is a small 1 lane next to the townhouse development that provides access in there, but that doesn't touch on to the subject property.
thank you. I'll seek clarification from staff after. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Bonner, I hit you too hard and you've disappeared, but there you go.
And through you to our delegation, are these going to be rental units, or are they going to be strata and sold at retail rates?
The expectation is that the developer will have an opportunity to make them as saleable units, but I would anticipate there could be a significant number of rentals. Because they're small footprint, they're close to bus lanes, they're close to recreation and walking distances, we anticipate that it would be very popular amongst students considering Vancouver Island University, or potentially seniors who use the programs at Bevan Park. So we would anticipate the small footprint would tie in ideally for them. We have 1 and 2 bedroom units. As I said, they're small footprint.
And another one, if I may, is the person making the proposal to do this rezoning going to be doing the building, or is it their plans that they will be be doing the work?
The developers, the Browns, they are the owners at this point. There's been some discussion, but they don't have a background in doing development. They're looking to move forward with this concept, and we will consider going for a development permit on the form and character, parking, landscaping, et cetera, at that point, but they would be open to a developer that sees value in this and wishes to proceed with the development and the marketing of it.
So that means they would sell the property?
They would consider selling it after a zoning amendment, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Any further questions for Mr. Anderson? Thanks very much. Councillor Armstrong, you had a question for staff, or do you mean? Yes, if we're finished with Mr. Anderson. Thank you very much, sir.
If I could just get clarification, perhaps I'm misunderstanding it, because it does state that all units will be accessed from the section of Browns Lane to the north, close to where the lane intersects with Labio.
Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe I can ask that page 65, there's a site plan that might help with the discussion.
Thank you.
And on this image, the right is to the north. And so you can see that the primary access, it might be difficult to see on the screen here, but the primary access does come out onto Browns Lane, which is, and then exits immediately onto Labio. So technically it comes out onto Browns, but for all intents and purposes, it will look like an access coming off of Labio.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, Councillor Gesselbrock, please.
Motion that zoning amendment bylaw 2019, number 4500.157, to rezone 2379 Browns Lane from single dwelling residential R1 to residential corridor, pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move zoning amendment bylaw 2019, number 4500.157, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner.
If I may, in the event that we do this rezoning and the property is sold, what other types of buildings could, in theory, be built on this thing? Like how much density could be possibly built with this new rezoning?
Your worship, we'll just refer to the zone here and just give council a brief overview of the permitted uses, but certainly residential is one of the primary uses within the Core 1.
Yeah, if I could, thank you. If I could speak to that. So yeah, the property is proposed to be rezoned to Corridor 1. There are a number of permitted uses. It's primarily intended to be residential with lower intensity commercial type uses. But in this case, yeah, multiple family dwelling is permitted, as well as office, personal care, seniors housing, and some accessory uses, as well as daycare, artist studio. There's a number of hotel. There's a number of uses that are permitted within the Corridor 1 zone that could be accommodated on the property in the future.
Would you happen to have an idea of what would be the maximum amount of units that could be built there? Like, say they decided to build the entire property into an apartment building.
Through your worship, to the councillor's question, it would be difficult to tell the number of units. That would depend on the size of units, and we're seeing development trending towards smaller units these days, but it's a floor area ratio calculation that looks at it's the amount of building coverage on the lot. So the size of lot is a function of the floor area ratio, and in this case, the floor area ratio, the base floor area ratio is 1. So the size of the property I don't have at my fingertips, but the building area would be equal to the area of the lot, theoretically at the base density. There's also provisions in the zoning bylaw that would allow additional density based on amenity bonusing up to a floor area of 1.5 FAR, which is 1.5 times the area of the parcel, would be the maximum permitted building area if they were to achieve all the, if a developer were to achieve all the permitted density bonusing provisions within the zoning bylaw currently.
Councillor Bonner, that's it. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just building off that question, the community amenity contribution is calculated based on the amount of doors. If the applicant didn't go through with this proposal and a different development was proposed, I guess that's sort of why I'm questioning. I thought Councillor Bonner's question was relevant in the sense if someone came and built more units, would we not have sort of missed out on our community amenity contribution policy calculation?
And Your Worship, what I would say on that is we've identified this property is proposing 27 units. So at the current council policy of $1,000 per door, that would be $27,000. However, in recognition of what Councillor Brown's saying and the potential that someone could modify the development in the future, when we register these covenants, we will register the charge at $1,000 a door. So if there's additional units above and beyond the 27, we would achieve additional community contributions.
Very good. Any further questions, discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Motion that council directs staff to secure the road dedication, community amenity contribution, and reciprocal access agreement prior to the adoption of the bylaw, should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Seconded. Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is OCP amendment application, OCP P89, and rezoning application RA 395-38 McCleary Street. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, this is both an amendment to the official community plan and the city's zoning bylaw in order to allow for the development of a 175-unit multifamily development on the subject property. The property is currently vacant, as council is aware, and it's about 1.1 hectares, which is about 2.5 acres. Of course, the site has played a fairly significant role in the community and historically has at one time had the original Nanaimo Hospital and the Malaspina College on the site, and more recently seniors seniors housing up until a few years ago where the building was demolished and now the property has remained vacant for a couple of years. It's an interesting property in that it's a large site within our downtown, relatively flat and but well serviced. I should say, I hear people chuckling. It's relatively flat compared to many of the properties that we deal with across the community, so I'll acknowledge it's not completely flat. But what I was going to mention is an interesting property in that you have an old city neighborhood plan which was done in 1994, which kind of envisions the property being used for single-family homes or duplexes. I would say very much kind of reflective of what you see on the neighboring blocks. However, because of the historic use on the site, you have zoning in place which allows for a much higher density. So the zoning in place was more reflective of the seniors congregate housing and the buildings that were there on the site. So under the existing zoning, you could still have quite an intensive development on the property, much higher than what's envisioned by the neighborhood plan. So when the applicants approached us and began talking about this site, it's certainly within that context that we were aware of. The zoning allowed for something different than the neighborhood plan. However, what they're proposing in order to proceed with multifamily clearly requires rezoning of the site, but also requires an amendment to the official community plan and to the neighborhood plan, as the current proposal does not comply with either. So before you this evening, you have amendments to the OCP and the city's zoning bylaw. Your Worship, I'm not going to go into details on the proposal. I know you have a number of delegations tonight, including those from the applicant, and I'm sure they'll walk through the proposal for you. But what I would note that the location plan is on page 79 of in your agenda, and there's an air photo on page 99.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. We do have a number of delegations. Before we start, I would remind everyone that I am ruthless about the 5-minute time limit because one has to be fair to everybody, and if I allow someone to go over, it's not being fair to the others. So the first of the many delegations we have is Janet Wright, member of the Nanaimo Old City Association. And Ms. Wright, as you appreciate, 5 minutes, light turns orange at 4, and
I do.
if you could introduce yourself and we'll carry on. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. My name is Janet Wright, and I'm a member and former board member of the Nanaimo Old City Association. Thank you for the opportunity to share the views of Old City residents regarding the Molnar Group's application to amend the official community plan, the Old City Neighborhood Concept Plan, and to rezone the property located at 388 McCleary Street. The Old City is Nanaimo's historic neighborhood, located in the heart of the city. It is comprised largely of older single-family homes. The property at 388 McCleary Street is roughly in the center of an area zoned single-family duplex between Fitzwilliam and Albert Streets. It is bordered by McCleary, Franklin, and Kennedy Streets. NOCA has been working on the redevelopment of this site since 2016, before the old hospital was demolished and the site sold. Since September 2017, we have worked with the Molnar Group toward the goal of reaching a win for our neighborhood and for the developer. NOCA has remained engaged with the city, the Molnar Group, and most importantly, with local residents. We have not simply reacted to the Molnar's present proposal. We sought feedback from neighborhood residents in March and May 2017 and in March 2018. In March and April 2019, we surveyed neighborhood residents to gauge their support on the specifics of the Molnar proposal in the context of the community plan and the neighborhood concept plan. We received 148 responses to our survey. 93% of those responses voted against the current proposal. The Nanaimo Old City Association does not support the proposed development. However, we support the right kind of development for this site and for our neighborhood, and we remain committed to working with the Molnar Group. NOCA supports a development whose density is within the current guidelines of the OCP and the Neighborhood Concept Plan, a mix of housing including duplex, fourplex, cluster housing, and townhomes, and a mix of rental and ownership tenure. The 388 McCleary site is firmly in the neighborhood classification in the OCP. The Molnar Group has applied to have the property changed to the corridor classification. The OCP describes corridors as major roads, often connector streets, which may contain small-scale commercial services for the neighborhood. Fitzwilliam Street is an example. Corridors permit 3 times the density of neighborhoods and building heights up to 6 stories. In no way do McCleary, Kennedy, or Franklin Streets at 388 McCleary Street resemble the description or the intent of the corridor classification. The OCP neighborhood classification permits a maximum density of 58 dwelling units on a lot this size and building heights up to 4 stories. Each of these 58 green dots represents 1 dwelling unit as the classification permits. The Molnar Group's application is for 175 dwelling units. The 117 red dots represent the increased density proposed. Only 7% of our survey respondents supported 100 or more dwellings. One of the top concerns NOCA heard in all of our engagements was a concern about parking and traffic. In our survey, 42% of respondents specifically commented on these concerns. NOCA believes that the overwhelming density proposed at this site will lead to traffic problems and street parking issues.
And 1 minute.
Further, we believe the 3 no-through streets close to the site, along with the increased density, will worsen traffic flow. NOCA acknowledges that the Molnar Group has made changes in response to our feedback, including proposing a mixed tenure, adding 15 townhomes along McCleary Street, creating a view corridor, and eliminating the laneway access off McCleary Street. However, major issues identified by NOCA have not been addressed, including the scale of the development, its overwhelming density, and its incompatibility with the existing residential character of our neighborhood. It is important to note that NOCA first communicated these concerns to the Molnar Group in our letter of November 8, 2017. In closing, NOCA sees the property at 388 McCleary Street as a development site, and we look forward to continuing the conversation about a path forward. Thank you so much.
I well appreciate the high drama of this venue, but this is not a theater, and if there was a presentation that you didn't appreciate, I would no more appreciate you booing than I would clapping. And I'm going to ask you to restrain yourselves as people do make their presentations. It's not going to influence council one way or the other. The next delegation is Mr. Molnar from the Molnar Group.
Good evening, Your Worship, and good evening, councillors. Obviously, I'm here to support our project where we went through a very long and professional planning process to get this project in front of you. We feel very strongly that we have definitely designed the project as per the discussions with NOCA, and there is always a limit how far you can listen to public input. We have never intended to do townhouses on McCleary Street, and we have now proposed townhouses on McCleary Street. We never intended to do 4-story buildings, and we have 4-story buildings on the project. The bottom line is, when we bought this property, we knew that we have an outright zoning for senior housing. We can put on this property without consultation and without coming to council, just working with a simple application, we can put 220 to 240 senior housing units on this property, and we choose to not to do that, particularly because I felt that we wanted to do an inclusive project where everybody from Nanaimo can rent an apartment from us. If you do a senior housing project, we are excluding the majority of the population, and only my age group can rent there. So we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have an open project where the city is growing. There is, as you know, our previous projects were tremendously successful and well received. So we just felt, let's do that. We discussed it with staff. We never expected that NOCA Association will totally ignore the fact that we can do a 240, 230 unit apartment project there for seniors tomorrow morning. And I'm just really confused to understand why people who we worked with through 5 meetings and listened to, they don't understand that if they happen to be successful, they will get a much larger project with a totally different density. And we basically are happy with the project which is in front of you. We want to build it, and we think the community will tremendously benefit from it. And if you all agree, then you will vote for it, and we ask you to do that. And we appreciate the staff's input. We worked very hard with the staff to accommodate all the requirements from the staff, and we have agreed to all of them what was required of us. I have our architect here who can take you through the entire project if you like that.
Is that it, Mr. Mulliner, for you?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Turley?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, through to Mr. Molnar. I understand that you had developed and continue to own the rental development on Terminal Avenue at Cypress.
We owned it for about 5 years. We sold it a couple of years ago.
So I don't know if you're privy to the stats or not, but do you have any idea what the percentage of the suites in that facility actually have vehicles attached to them, or more appropriately, or what is the average number of vehicles per suite?
During the 5 years we owned the property and managed it day to day, we had about 80% of the parking stalls, 82% actually was the correct number of parking stalls rented.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Unfortunately, I didn't get to ask this question to the last delegation, so I'll ask it to you instead. When I met with NOCA, a bit of early part of this year, they mentioned 21 items that they had concerns about. And they mentioned at that time that you had met them on 6 of those items. You had agreed to through your community consultation, 6 of those items. And one of them specifically was the townhouse setup on McCleary Street. Is this part of your normal operations? Like, do you build townhouses on a regular basis?
We actually don't. We used to 30 years ago, but in the last 20 years we haven't built any townhouses. We strictly did this for NOCA, and we basically accepted their request and accommodated the request. And we were originally planning to put 4-story buildings on McCleary Street.
I see. And of the 6 that you agreed to through this community consultation, did NOCA ever come back to you and say, you've given us 6, we're taking 6 off our list?
No, and also was very interesting, other than the mention by Janet earlier, we have never had a single thank you or an acknowledgement of working and listening to NOCA. We just basically, they asked us things and told us things to do, and we did some and we couldn't do some. I never heard about the 21 requests, but I know there were many requests, and I know that we accommodated. The 2 major requests they had is no 5-story buildings and the townhouses on McCleary. The view corridor was a minor request, we did that, but basically, I don't recall. We can ask David McGrath, our architect, if he ever seen any list of 21 requests, but I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Mulliner.
Thank you.
The next is Dak Mulliner with the Mulliner Group.
We won't double up on you, so my son Dak can speak to any items you want to ask him, but David
That's
McGrath
fine.
is fine.
We'll let I was going to say, we'll let the sun talk.
Good evening, Your Worship, Council,
evening.
staff. My name is Dave McGrath. I am the next delegate, so if it's all right if I speak, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I've been working with my clients in Molnars for about 9 years now, and during that time, we've built communities, and I'll explain what I mean by communities, a mini community within Nanaimo. We provide a variety of unit sizes and from micro units that are 312 to 2-bedroom units that are 900 to 1,000 square feet. This really opens up what the demographics are, what is available, not only from a cost point perspective, but also just for use. Within these developments, we've always included fitness facilities, ample bike parking, outdoor space, indoor space for the community to use, the development to use. And this will provide a mix of rentals and condos as well. So the townhomes will be discussed is condo use, and then we're providing it open. That was another request by NOCA that we did meet. Amenity spaces, fitness centers, multi-purpose rooms, and other outdoor areas. It encourages a wide range of demographics and incomes. We're building a mini community and contributing to a larger community of Nanaimo. We've done an incredible amount of public engagement, more than I see, and I've been doing this for about 25 years. And it was very satisfying, I mean, getting to meet the neighbors and talking about their concerns and seeing how we can kind of go through this. And we thought we had reached to a point where we can present this. And I know that there was there was a questionnaire that went out, and I think it was heavily, this is my own opinion, at least what I've heard, it was really based on the density, and that's pretty well it. And of course, you're going to get a negative response back to density. We've looked at also, I mean, part of what we do is just to make sure that we're doing it properly and professionally. So we did get a traffic study on this, because one of the big concerns to the neighborhood was, what is this going to do to my everyday traffic? You know, what's going to happen? So 6 of the main intersections were looked at, and studies were done. So we had done the studies from a larger density proposal that we've done now to the 175. On this, from Watt Engineering, they have indicated in section 4 that the density does not warrant, so no changes are recommended to any of the intersections because of this added load. At most, they're showing up to on peak hours, 48-second delay. And that's just in one intersection. The rest are way below that. So I know everyone's concerned. Whenever I do one of these presentations, it's always parking and density. Those are the 2 things that are most hard to swallow by a community. But like I said, we are building a community here, and I strongly believe that this is a plus for this community, for the greater Nanaimo as well as this neighborhood community. And we look forward to working through the design and making sure that we're providing the best possible living spaces for this community that we're building. I thank you for your time. I'd just like to propose that, you know, on this FAR that we're proposing here is 1.2. And it is below what we, you know, which is similar to the FSR we could get to provide a senior care facility, but we would want to open this up to a larger demographic. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGrath. Questions? Councillor Thorpe?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the delegation, I did want to ask a question about traffic and parking, which you've at least partially addressed. I heard your comments about traffic. I didn't hear anything about parking, and I'm looking through the report and the attachments, and I don't see that referenced. Maybe I'm just missing it, but could you comment on parking plans, please?
So the parking was, the report itself did not address that. This is something that we're going to continue doing with Watt Engineering. So, but initial conversations, and not part of this report, is saying that what we're providing is adequate for the sizes of units that we're proposing. So we're proposing a significant amount of micro units, which are 312 square feet. Typically, those do not come with a a car. They're typically, what they are is younger demographics that do go into those. And what we are increasing is the bike parking areas on those. I'm not sure if there's been discussion as well as public transport contributions or anything to that effect, but that's something we always talk about as well.
We have 150 parking stalls, 150 parking stalls. And the bylaw requires 116.
All right, thank you. I might have a follow-up with staff later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Yeah, just, that's always a concern for me is parking as well as your traffic study. Was there any consideration to opening up any of those block streets, do you know?
Any of those? I'm sorry?
The block streets, or was that solely based on the streets that are presently open to traffic?
Those are on the streets open to traffic right now.
And right now, you've got 40, I believe, more parking spots that are required, is that correct? Is that what I heard?
40, correct.
Yes.
36.
36? Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you, through you, Your Honor. Just to be very
Worship will do,
clear.
it's not a court.
He's the worship.
Oh, Your Worship.
He's a
Just-
higher judge.
Just to be very clear, right now, you are approved with zoning without having to come forward to council for anywhere from 220 to 240 units for senior housing. Am I correct?
Correct, 100% correct.
So what we're actually getting here, if it goes to public hearing, would be lower density of 175 units with mixed from micro units to the condos or the townhouses.
May I make just one clarification? It's mostly based on FSR, so we're proposing 1.2 FSR. The current zoning allows us for 1.25, so it's a higher density that we're allowed.
But less units, yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the delegation? Thank you very much, appreciated. I take it Mr. Dak Molnar is not going to be speaking then, is that?
He will not.
He's happy to answer questions, though, if you have any.
No, we don't ask questions unless you agree to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next is Lawrence Riper. Mr. Riper? And Mr. Riper, you're familiar with the procedure? You've addressed council before?
Oh, I am.
Thank you. Go ahead if you can
Give me a
introduce
starter.
yourself.
I've lived in the Old City neighbourhood for many years. This proposal is ridiculous. The proponent refers to the site use as medium-density residential. With upwards of 175 units on about 4 stories, it qualifies for high-density residential, normally reserved for high-rises. In fact, out of all the collection of built and proposed high-rises in the city, only one comes close to 175 units. The average is closer to 120. The winner is Pacifica on Front Street with 169 units on 20 floors. The one that sits heavily on the seafront and blocks the bottom of Campbell Street, Pacifica has, and 388 McCleary intend to have townhouses too. We don't know what, if any, efforts Molnar has made to find a client that wanted a community service building, like Chartwell, the former owner. But they acquired a cleared site of 1.16 hectares for about 3.3 million, with an incredible view of our harbour that had not been fully visible for nearly a century. Certainly 100 to 200 people appreciated the unobstructed view from the site to watch the snowbirds this summer and last year. NOCA took a proactive stance to encourage development of 388 McCleary Street and ended up with interest from Molnar. Hardly a mutually supportive relationship. NOCA, an open community organisation, and Molnar, a private business. Both sides needed to learn about zoning and the latter about local conditions, much of which knowledge was gained from various open houses. Their presentations of density seem to have varied very little over the past year or two. In 1992, after a couple of years of community meetings, the city created the Old City Neighbourhood Concept Plan, detailing the zoning in its area. The plan is unique in the fact that it enshrines the precedent and priority of the Old City Neighbourhood Plan, policies and land designations over the OCP. I believe this priority and precedence is still active in the plan. I have seen no evidence of legal deletion of the two-page preamble signed by Mayor Joy Leach and Jim Bowden. I have checked all the amendments since. You will see that the neighbourhood plan was intended to last into the future and protect this community. Quoting the preamble, future high-density development, 100 units per hectare and greater, shall generally be restricted to the downtown core. The maximum density target specified in the OCP is 50 units per hectare. Another example of how dense and inappropriate this proposal is. The illustrations, without the trees, remind me of a maximum security prison. I have tried to understand both corridors and comprehensive development. The former has no connection with a road or passage, just a property, and COR1 is designated as medium-density residential. Apparently 388 may be some other specified type of corridor with other options. CD11 doesn't yet exist, but will be the result of creative negotiations between local government and the developer to create a feasible development plan to create one-of-a-kind zone, existential. What I'd like for the site is clarity on the legality of the neighbourhood plan and city staff and council to protect the interests of its residents as much or more than developers. This property is suitable to become a public park or be rezoned single-family duplex like the surrounding area. Molnar Group doesn't seem to appreciate the scale here. OCP quotes, the Old City Plan is attached here to and made a part of this plan. The policies and land designations for the Old City Plan constitute the OCP policies and designations for the Old City Plan area. The Old City Plan policies and designations take precedence over and replace other policies in the OCP where they conflict. And the Old City Neighbourhood Plan has a two-page preamble. This schedule is the Old City Neighbourhood Concept Plan. The policies and land designations of this plan...
1 minute, Mr. Riper.
Pardon?
1 minute.
Thank you. The designations of the plan constitute an official community plan, policies and designations for the plan area. As a result, policies and designations of Schedule J have priority over other policies in the OCP which may conflict with the policies of this schedule, which is the Old City Plan. That's it.
Thank you. Questions? Anyone? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And the last delegation we have on this is Dr. Eric Norman. And Dr. Norman, I think you've heard the pitch and the rules. If you could introduce yourself, 5 minutes.
And I'd like to thank City Council for the opportunity to speak here tonight. And good evening to everybody. Everyone has spoken on a number of things already, so I'll try not to be too repetitive, but I'll actually start with my last item, just to make sure, in case I run out of time. There are signage requirements associated with any rezoning application, and in the case of 388 McCleary Street, at this point in time, they haven't been met. There's no sign on Franklin Street. I'm referring to the large 4x8 signs that are supposed to be posted there. I called the development regarding that for the city and was told that they tried to put it at 45 degrees on the corner of Kennedy and Franklin, which is permitted, and that then accounts for a sign on both those abutments. But they weren't able to do it because of the trees, and so they put it in between two hedges on Kennedy, and therefore there is no sign on Franklin. And according to the signage requirements in rezoning applications, failure to post the sign in accordance with the bylaw will result in the removal of the bylaw from the agenda of the public hearing. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention. And I did call the city, and that was the explanation I had. But given that they would have had 2 years to get a sign ready and a location ready for it to satisfy this requirement, it seems a little strange that that hasn't been met. So I did want to bring that to your attention. And Another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention in the previous presentation, I believe, it's my understanding, there's a confusion between dwelling units and the rooms or accommodations that we are referring to with a senior center. We're throwing around numbers like 220 or 240, if I heard correctly earlier. They're not referring to dwelling units, just to clarify. I don't have all the specifics on exactly what that involves in a senior facility, but it is not a dwelling unit. So I just want to make sure nobody is confused between those two things. They're not interchangeable. And the presentation of that as a potential senior facility is coming across almost as a threat with a potential higher density of 220 or 240, as if we should be settling for the 175, a much lower number. So those are two items that I wanted to cover. 15 minutes was what I needed, but I only have 5, and which brings me to the exact ratio of the 58 units that are available right now under CS1, the current zoning, which is actually very generous. I feel personally that lot is a jewel. It is an incredible opportunity for city and community and neighborhood to work together to create something quite magical. There's many options there. CS1, you can do everything there, from daycare to hospitals to library, museum, health clinics, housing, recreational facilities. It's all possible, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be a combination of those. So I think something with a little more vision would be appropriate. In my opinion, the proposal we have in front of us it's highly unremarkable with a relatively formula type approach. It's very cost effective, the designs that they've come up with, which leads to larger profit margins, but I don't think the creativity or the vision is there. I don't think the vision is there for the community or for the neighborhood or for the city. There's so many possibilities for that area. I don't know what the final answer is for that lot, but I don't feel that this is it. So I just don't feel that this is it. I think that lot could be made much better use of. A density of 175 units, if there's anywhere from 1 or 2 to as many as 5 or 6 in any one of those dwelling units, means there could be anywhere from 500 to 800 people living on that 2.5 acre parcel of land. That's quite dense. I think by anybody's standards, that's quite dense. And I just don't feel that that's acceptable for this neighborhood. I live on McCleary Street. I live opposite that lot. And I think it could become something very positive for the neighborhood, for the community, and for Nanaimo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, please. I must tell you, nobody's winning any friends on council on this issue if they're going to clap, and not, despite my recommendation that you not do so, any more than I would have appreciated you booing Mr. Mulliner during his presentation. Any questions for Dr. Norman? Councillor Armstrong.
Perhaps we could just clarify that we're not at public hearings, so maybe staff could clarify that we don't need the signs yet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a public hearing.
Mr. Lindsay?
Your Worship, if you're looking for a comment on that, it's the first I've heard of any concerns about the signs. We'll certainly follow up and make sure they're in compliance with the bylaw, and if council decides to proceed to public hearing, we'll make sure they're updated in time with the date and information about the hearing.
Thank you. Any further questions for Dr. Norman? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just so everyone does understand, if there appears to be some confusion around this, whatever vote is taken tonight, the next step, if this matter does proceed, will be to a public hearing, at which time the public will have a further say. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Before, I got one question for staff.
Please.
Thank you, Worship, through you. So could we get some clarity on the numbers of potential density between what is being proposed and what is allowed with the seniors? And how many people living on the site could we expect in both scenarios?
Your Worship, I'm sort of in a tough position in giving you specific comments about the number of units that the applicants have said that they could do under the existing density. I'm sure they've done a plan and come up with how many could feasibly sit, but we haven't reviewed that. So, but what I would say is that the existing zoning allows for seniors congregate housing, which does allow for residential dwellings. So we have many seniors congregate housing projects throughout the city, and quite often you'll see a range of housing units in those, including fully independent living units, so they'll have their own kitchens, bedrooms, bathrooms, just like a condominium, through the whole spectrum up to units which have a larger degree of care. It's really up to the operator to decide what they wish to market. The common feature is that they must have a dining room and commercial kitchen where they can provide services to the residents, but the units themselves can be independent living units.
Just to follow up on that, so when we hear that it is possible to allow up to 230 seniors units, one unit means a dwelling which could be a large spectrum from being a single room to a townhouse.
That is correct, Your Worship. The other point I would note is, based on the applicant's presentation, they're saying that they base that on existing density, and their proposal that have in front of council this evening, based on an FAR number, not a unit number, but a floor area ratio number, is actually below what they could provide under the existing zoning.
Thank you. I move the official community plan amendment bylaw 2019 number 6500.040 to redesignate 388 McCleary Street on the future land use plan map 1 from neighborhood to corridor, and to amend the text of section 4.1.2 land designations of the Old City Neighborhood Concept Plan, pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Move official community plan amendment bylaw 2019 number 6500.040 pass second reading.
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion? Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I know you already answered this, but I'm going to ask it again anyway for the benefit of the public and those in attendance. If we proceed in passing this, the next step would be to go to a public hearing.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Move that zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.124 to rezone 388 McCleary Street from Community Service 1 to Comprehensive Development 11 pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.124 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Turley. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
I move that council direct staff to secure road dedication, community amenity contribution, site improvements, and public rights-of-way prior to adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw 2019 number 4500.124 should council support the bylaw at third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is nuisance abatement and cost recovery bylaw. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I get on to the next item, can I just confirm that the public, just for the benefit of the audience before they leave, the September public hearing is September the 19th. Typically, we're on the first Thursday of the month, but for various reasons, including the holiday and other commitments of council, it's been moved to the 19th. So we will update our notices and make sure that the community is aware of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Perhaps we'll give a moment for the gallery to clear.
people's understanding of us as a council is, right? Like people are thinking it's
Mr. Lindsay, back to nuisance abatement and cost recovery bylaw. I see you've brought Mr. LeBerge with you for support.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a brief introduction. As you mentioned, do have Mr. LeBerge here with me this evening, and we're certainly able to answer any questions that council may have on this report. I just did want to highlight that in addition to amending a bylaw which has been in place for a number of years to make sure that we reflect current provincial legislation, we're also amending the fees in case there is a property is designated under this bylaw and it is visited by either ourselves, the police, or fire. Under the existing bylaw, there's a whole schedule and with varied rates that apply depending on, it can be the rank of the official that attends the site or the position at the city which attends the site, and it can be cumbersome to try to calculate who was there and for what period of time. So what we've done is a review, and Mr. LeBerge has led a review of other communities, and the standard approach seems to be a flat rate per visit. So we're recommending that in this new updated bylaw that we move from that list of hourly rates based on the attendee, the attendant, that we instead move to a flat rate of $250 per visit.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move nuisance abatement and cost recovery bylaw 2019, number 7250, to prevent, abate, and prohibit nuisances and provide for the cost recovery of abatement or nuisances, pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move nuisance abatement and cost recovery bylaw 2019, number 7250, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor?
Discussion.
Pardon me, rushing along. Councillor Bonner. I just seem to be ignoring you today. I'm very sorry.
It wouldn't be the first time. And through you to staff, if I may, in the research leading up to this, is there any communities that do an escalating scale so that it's 250 the first time, the second time it's 275 and up? Is that an option?
Mr. LeBerge.
Yes, that is an option and a model that some communities use.
Is there any reason why that wasn't suggested here?
I think we try to take a middle-of-the-road balanced approach, and we kind of strike the middle ground with our proposal with what most communities are doing.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Sorry, Your Worship, I was there.
Oh.
If I may?
Councillor Thorpe, if I'm going to ignore Councillor Bonner, I might as well
Sure.
go in for a sheep as a lamb.
All right, thank you very much. If I may, through you to Mr. LeBerge, or to, I think, probably Mr. Rudolph or Mr. Lindsay for my first question, and that is, given that this bylaw and the amounts involved are 26 years old, do we have any built-in mechanism for review of bylaws, or is it just something that we tackle as we suddenly notice the need for? And I know there's a tremendous number of bylaws. Our city operates by them. I just wondered if there is any automatic mechanism.
Through the chair, with this particular bylaw, there was a challenge that the original provisions of the Local Government Act that were used to enact the bylaw were repealed. And there was a period of time that if we try to open the bylaw back up to amend the schedule, that it would jeopardize making the bylaw overall invalid. And it took some years for the community charter to bring up sections that gave us the same types of power. So that did probably offset it for 5 and maybe up to 10 years.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll certainly support this. And if I may, Your Worship, I'd just like to quote from one of the summary points in the report, which interested me very much. And if I may, as a commentary, read out that where it quotes, "There is increased demand for on and off-street parking downtown, and at times city parkades are operating at near capacity." That's something which concerns me and I think bears future discussion, but it's not relevant to this motion directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move nuisance abatement and cost recovery bylaw 2019, number 7250, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And the next is traffic and highways regulation bylaw amendment. Mr. Lindsay or Mr. LeBerge?
Your Worship, I'll start off, and certainly Mr. LeBerge can jump in if there are any questions. As you noted, this is a proposed amendment to our traffic and highways regulation bylaw, and it's specifically to do with disabled parking. The bylaw, as it's currently written, provides unlimited free parking to those citizens displaying disabled parking decal. And what we have found is it's had the unintended consequence of our city parkades being used for long-term storage. So it does two things. It is not what we believe the intention of providing this exemption was, but more importantly, it doesn't allow for those spaces to actually be available to users when they enter into the parkades and are looking to access those parking stalls. So we're recommending that Council amend the bylaw, which would result in removing the exemption for parkades, but it would remain an existing exemption for on-street parking under the bylaw.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move traffic and highways regulation amendment bylaw 2019, number 5000.046, to remove the time limit and payment exemptions for vehicles displaying disabled parking permits in city parkades, passed first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move traffic and highways regulation amendment bylaw 2019, number 5000.046, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Any discussion?
Yeah.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the concerns I have is I believe it restricts them now to 2-hour parking. If that's correct, I have a concern about that. I think 2 hours is not enough time for some people, especially if they have to take out wheelchairs, move or those, go down to an appointment, and then come back within that time frame. I personally think if a 3-hour time limit might be better, because sometimes I've watched some people struggle for 25, 30 minutes to get their wheelchair out and then get moving, and, you know, some of our downtown areas aren't exactly conducive for rolling along on a wheelchair. So I do have a concern that I think 2 hours is kind of limiting. Thank you.
Through the chair, the time limitation, the way the bylaw reads right now, there's no time limitation for vehicles that display handicap placards, meaning you can park a vehicle and leave it in the parkade for months if you choose. There's no limitation on the time that these vehicles can remain in the parkade. It's just simply that require payment after 2 hours.
Yeah. Clarification. So this is then just for parkades? I guess I must have misunderstood it, because I thought this was for on-street parking as well. Sorry. My apologies.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, my apologies to Council. I was ahead of myself. My comment regarding the demand on parkades was meant for this issue, not the previous one on noise abatement. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. A question to staff, if I may. In working on this report, did we come up with any figures on the loss of revenue for handicap spots on city streets? That's I know it's the amount that you've already figured out for the parkades. Do we look at on streets at all? Through the chair, we did not look at the use of handicap parking on the streets. We focus on the parkades because that's where we're finding vehicles that were sitting for months with flattening tires, and it seems to be really a storage issue for
downtown and island residents that are storing vehicles in the parkade facilities, and it doesn't seem to be the same issue on our streets.
One more, if I may. Going with your middle-of-the-road analogy, do most of this municipalities not charge for handicap parking spaces?
Through the chair, that's not a matter that I've researched. This bylaw is largely managed by engineering section, and I brought it forward simply because it was, from an enforcement perspective, a flagrant abuse of the intention of the exemptions in the use of our facilities.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. LeBerge. Just so I'm clear, they still have unlimited time to park in the parkade so long as they pay for it.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, so the only concern I have is a lot of handicapped people aren't as young and fit as the rest of us. Is there going to be any leeway given to their ability to actually access the payment facilities and then get back to their car?
Through the chair, through this amendment, I think it'll actually improve their accessibility because the designated handicap parking is in the places with best access to the exits and closest to the amenities like the theater. And those spaces are currently being filled by vehicles that aren't moving for weeks and months at a time. So I think it'll actually improve accessibility.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Oh, no, I'm done, sorry.
Are you done? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. Some of these questions just got me thinking, was there any consultation done with people with disabilities regarding this change?
There was no public, through the chair, I'm sorry, there was no public consultation in respect to this particular proposal, simply that we thought overall that it was the abuse of these placards is actually inhibiting the ability of folks with handicap needs to access the parking that's been provided and designated for their use.
No further questions?
Yep.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Through you to Mr. LeBerge. Not that I don't doubt that these parking spots were being abused for people parking in their vehicle a lot longer and blocking them for folks that needed to access them. Councillor Brown's point does raise an interesting consideration. It would be interesting to hear what the backstory is of folks living, parking there, just in the off chance that there is something that we didn't quite know about for somebody that have disabilities using that spot. And I'm curious if there is any possibility with this change that we could look into what was the reasoning behind there, and find that out before making the change, just to avoid any unintended consequences.
Through the chair, points are well taken. One thing that really came to the mind of staff when we were looking at this is that this bylaw was enacted in 1993, and the density and demand and turnover in our parkades was very different then. And we're to the point now at various times of the day, in different days of the week, particularly when there are events at the conference center and the theater, that our parkade off-street facilities are fully to capacity, and it's a much different dynamic than, and probably much different parking needs than there were when this bylaw was enacted.
No further questions, discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move nuisance abatement and recovery bylaw 2019, number 7250, pass third reading.
Seconded. Councillor Martman. All those in favor? Sorry?
F1. Oh, we're on F1.
Traffic and Highways Regulation Amendment Bylaw 5000.046 for third reading.
Apologies, my mistake.
Sorry.
I move Traffic
Good
and
catch.
Highways Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 5000.046, pass third reading.
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. We're on course, Ms. Snellgrove. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. LaBerge. The next is Section 11, Bylaws, Subdivision Control Amendment Bylaw Number 2019, Number 3260.04. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move that Subdivision Control Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 3260.04, to amend Schedule A, Manual of Engineering Standards and Specifications, be adopted.
Seconded?
Second.
Councillor Armstrong. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is Zoning Amendment Bylaw Number 2019, Number 4500.142.
I move motion that Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 4500.142, to rezone 6683 Mary Ellen Drive to allow cannabis retail store as a site-specific use in Woodgrove Urban Center zone be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is Zoning Amendment Bylaw Number 2019, Number 4500.143.
I move that Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 4500.143, to rezone 3200 Island Health Highway North to allow cannabis retail store as a site-specific use in the City Commercial Center zone be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just question to staff is, I think we've done 14 of these so far. Do we have an idea of how many have reached this point of fourth reading?
Your Worship, I think in response to Councillor Bonner's number there, those are all applications which are at various states in the approval process. My recollection is these would be the second, third, and fourth sites to receive final approval from the city, which means they would now need to go forward and get their final approval from the province for their licensing.
Okay, thank you. I just happened to notice that of the four, half of them are provincial government ones, and two aren't. I'm starting to get calls from people who have put applications in. Not that it's anything we can do about it, but just to hopefully move some of the other ones along as well. No question.
Your Worship, can I comment on that? Because I think it's important if the community is concerned about this. From staff's perspective, we're dealing with the land use item and we've dealt with all applications the same. As part of council's system, you've asked for the province to make a determination about fit and proper before you bring these forward for final adoption. So it's that process that we're waiting on for many of these. Of course, when it comes to the provincial stores, they don't go through the same process to determine if they're fit and proper to obtain a license. So that's why you might see them back here for final adoption before others who are going through that process. But it's the province that's dictating that time frame right now. It's certainly not the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is Zoning Amendment Bylaw Number 2019, Number 4500.150. Councillor Gesselbrock.
I move that Zoning Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 4500.150, to rezone 6404 Metro Drive to allow cannabis retail store as a site-specific use in the Woodgrove Urban Center zone be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Brown. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Snellgrove, we have no correspondence. No one's giving us new notices of motion. On to other business.
Excuse me, Your Worship.
Pardon me?
Councillor Bonner has a notice of motion.
Councillor Bonner. I'm batting 500 or at least maybe
that
1,000.
much, yes, sir. So I'd like to do a notice of motion for next council meeting. And then the motion reads, whereas it's recognized that the city has an addictions crisis and that there is not enough addiction facilities to meet the demand for treatment, and that the John Howard Society presently has 5 beds available for addiction treatment that are not being used because of lack of funding, that a one-time grant of $70,500 be provided to the John Howard Society to fund 5 beds at the Vancouver Island Therapeutic Community Center for 6 months.
Thank you very much. That is a notice of motion, truly. On to other business. Councillor Bonner, a motion regarding commercial properties along bus routes. And we have a delegation on that. Do we go to the delegation first, Ms. Snellgrove? Mr. Manners. I don't have to explain the rules to you, I trust.
I'm aware.
Thank you very much. Please
Good evening,
proceed.
Mayor and Council. My name is Bill Manners from Nanaimo. I originally asked to be a delegation based on the original motion. The motion's been changed, but my thoughts still apply. And that is, we have had for many years a snow removal bylaw, and it's one that hasn't been enforced. People phone the city, they make a complaint. The bylaw is complaint-based. So people phone, they make a complaint, and the city's response is generally along the line as, we'd love to do something about it, but we don't have the manpower. Or we'd love to do something about it, but we can't get out there. Or we can't do anything about it this time. Now, I, more than anybody in the city, or along with most people in the city, think that the staff do a wonderful job. So I'm not talking down to the staff. They do a great job. Yes, sometimes they can't get out and do it. Maybe we need more bylaws officers. I don't know what the answer is, but the answer is, does the city put in place bylaw or regulations that targets only one segment of the population? Are we only going to target bus routes? Are we only going to target the commercial properties? What about the properties such as ICBC, the hospital, the city of Nanaimo, the regional district? All of those are guilty of not clearing their sidewalks when we get snow. I live out in the Uplands area, in the Dover area, and Uplands Walk, all down there, the sidewalks are cleared. They're cleared along Hammond Bay Road, except for the RDN. They're cleared along Kalinda, except for ICBC and the RDN. Applecross, Portsmouth, completely cleared. And the reason why most of those are completely cleared, there's 1 or 2 that aren't. The reason they're mostly cleared is because for the last 4 or 5 years, I have made a point of every time that it snows to phone them the next day and remind them of the bylaw. And when I do, they clear them. It's very simple. People just need to be educated. But they should be educated regardless of what they are. And it's also important to note that it's not just the property owner that's responsible, but it's also the person that is living there. If people are leasing the property, if they're renting the property, they are still responsible. One of the properties, I'm not going to mention who it is, but there's one property here in Nanaimo that never clears it, and it's very dangerous to walk around it. And the response from the person is, I rent it off so-and-so, go talk to them. And as we know, the bylaw states that it's up to the occupier of the property. So I understand where Councillor Bonner is coming from with the motion, but I don't think it's fair to just single out certain people. Thank you. Any questions?
Not for the delegation, no. Afterwards.
Councillor Armstrong. It's here for staff too. Mr. Manners, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Councillor Thorpe, a question for staff?
Thank you, Your Worship. Probably through you to legislative staff, or perhaps I'll ask for your ruling on this. Is this, first of all, a motion or a notice of motion this evening?
This is a motion.
And the reason I ask is we were given a notice of motion And now the wording within the past 24 hours has been changed, and changed substantially, so that I don't personally feel it's the same motion. So I was prepared to debate the notice of motion that we were given, and I would just like a legislative opinion or your opinion on whether this is in fact the same motion.
I'd like to defer the motion.
Ms. Snellgrove, I'm going to ask for your comments first before I hear from Councillor Armstrong.
So I'd say it is a different motion because the wording has changed, but it is on under other business, so it's council's pleasure if they'd like to deal with it now or defer it to a future meeting.
Councillor Armstrong.
I think there's significant legal consequences in here that require a legal opinion, very significant ones. I also would like to have a staff report. I don't want to set the public up thinking that we can do this when we, in my opinion, we do not have staff capacity. We only have 2 people that work on this, the rest are tied up with other duties. How 2 people can do all this is beyond me, so I'm not prepared to discuss this or even enter it without a staff opinion, a staff report and a legal opinion, because there, like I said, I think you're going to find there's charter implications when you signal out just one group. Thank you.
Are you making a motion then to defer? Is there a seconder? Councillor Turley? Discussion on this motion?
No.
Councillor Brown, sorry.
No discussion on a motion to defer.
There is no motion on the floor.
There is. In fairness, there is, correct.
There is a motion on the floor to defer this to a future meeting, and discussion
this.
is allowed on a motion to defer.
What are we deferring? Councillor Bonner never put his motion on the floor.
Councillor Armstrong moved that we defer consideration of the motion, and my understanding is that Councillor Turley just seconded.
I think Councillor Brown is making the point that there was no motion per se on the floor in sense of a mover and a seconder. But I'm taking it that Councillor Armstrong's motion is to defer this item generally. And is that appropriate?
That was my understanding.
That's appropriate, I believe. So any discussion on the motion to defer this item? Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I think we need to be a little bit specific with this because I've heard Councillor Armstrong's and I actually fully support that sentiment. I understand Councillor Bonner's sentiment around this as well. I think to give some staff some guidance here, that they're probably picking up, there's a common thread here around different conversations around bylaws, but I do think that this would benefit from a more robust conversation at the GPC, which seems like the appropriate forum, and I think why we set it up. And I think we need more than just Councillor Bonner's motion. I think we also need to have some staff presentations and reports on our bylaws, the general services that we provide. We had a pretty good presentation to us around revenues, and I think some comparisons there with different municipalities would probably benefit council and help us understand our revenue and our budgeting. And I know that staff are working on a business case for our consideration for finance and audit. And then just the general policies of our organizations around enforcement. We heard Mr. Libbers refer to the middle of the road. Maybe council supports that, maybe it supports something a little harsher, or maybe not at all, and I think we would benefit from that conversation. So while I do support the deferral, I think we need to be very specific about what we're deferring.
Are we prepared to agree on a deferral motion that says it is deferred pending receipt of the staff report to the GPC? That summarize it? I mean, given the contents of the motion, which are fairly specific, I think there is broad enough range for staff to prepare an appropriate report. I'm going to look to Mr. Rudolph first, and then I'll go to Councillor Gesselbrock.
There's a need for a little extra clarity on this, I think. So a staff report on this specific issue, this specific notice of motion as modified, or which is something we could do, or is this a broader conversation about bylaws and a defer? So there's kind of 2 issues here. One related to this issue, and the second one, which Councillor Brown just mentioned, was a workshop on a broader set of issues, which either are possible, but just a little clarity on that would be helpful. And we'd be pleased to provide you with information on either category.
I'll call on Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you,
first.
Worship. I'm just curious if Councillor Brown would be willing to provide a more specific and to build an amendment on the deferral that was put forward by Councillor Armstrong.
Wouldn't agree to it. I wanted deferral just on this. and then
Your
we could talk
worship,
about the
may I
bylaw after.
suggest two motions? One would to deal with the deferral, of course, then as to what? And the second is if there's a second motion on bylaws and seeking a more in-depth opportunity to review the bylaw situation or something to that effect, we certainly can accommodate that. I'm not sure how you would like to handle this.
I'm not sure that I want to entertain or encourage a motion to deal with the larger issue of bylaws arising out of a discussion around a very singular notice of motion put forward by Councillor Bonner. And as much as I appreciate the impetus it's given for the topic in general, I don't frankly think that this is the appropriate time, or do we have the appropriate information to make a decision on a broader decision around bylaws? It seems to me that this raises a very specific issue that we're a fairly discrete issue in my view, that we're all well aware of, and may be more appropriate to narrow the focus rather than broaden the focus and put staff to a lot of work and potentially involve the expenditures of significant monies for legal opinions, et cetera, that may or may not work. I'm going to go to Councillor Armstrong, and then I'm going to hear from Councillor Bonner, who after all started this train in motion.
I would just like to defer the main motion, and then, as I said at the GBC earlier, I would like to have bylaws be one of our topics at the GBC, where we understand how many bylaw people they are, what their limitations are, what they're working, all of that, because I don't think council knows how few we have and how far stretched out they are. And it's like when you tell that you're going to lower a speed limit, but there's no place to enforce it. And that's my concern here, because I don't think we should be directing the bylaw people where to go, because there could be an emergency tomorrow where they're all down working on something that, like, we had to divert everybody to go work on the homeless situation. So that's what they've been doing. So I'm very concerned when we start directing it. I think it's a conversation that I would like to have at the GPC.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. This kind of boils down to policy, question of enforcement policy. And might I suggest that we have October 28th open. It's GPC. There's nothing there. That is a full 2 months in which staff can come forward. And if we want to narrow it, maybe it's a question of enforcement policy. And how do we, and capacity of bylaws. So this motion specifically deals with, to me, a safety issue, not only when the snow flies, but as walking down sidewalks that a lot of us do on a regular basis. And a lot of people who have disabilities are trying to get through sidewalks that are overgrown with vegetation. So I would prefer that we deal with this sooner than later, or at least before the snow flies. So perhaps October 28th would be an idea. And if we're looking for a focus, let's look at an enforcement policy for bylaws and how it would relate to this. As long as sidewalks are getting cleared, and if they're not, someone's paying for it, I don't have a problem. Like, we can just carry on. But that's the intent of this whole thing. So October 28th would be, I would suggest.
27th.
27th? Thank you.
Are we agreed then on a motion to defer this to the October 27th GPC? The expectation is that staff will be able to speak to that issue at that point, and we can make decisions from there. I think Councillor Bonner's motion raises very effectively, in fairness to him, the opportunity to have discussion around broad communications and this issue, because we're going to face it this winter, as we do every time. I have some interest around this as a concept, because keep in mind that this is a bylaw that doesn't prohibit you from doing something. It forces you to do something positive. So it is a different kind of animal from a legal perspective, and there are implications around that. And so as much as I appreciate the discussion on it, I would like to think, if we have agreement from the mover and the seconder now on the motion to defer to the October 27th GPC, I think we will have a somewhat better understanding of the broader implications of this, because again, as I said, I have no interest in entertaining some broad discussion with all that we have on our plates in front of us in the next few months. I don't want to entertain some broad discussion around bylaws and enforcement, because this is a singularly different animal. This requires you to do something positive, as I said, as opposed to prohibiting you from doing something. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. Mic on?
Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I respectfully disagree. I do think that this particular motion is very well intentioned, but I think it needs to be situated in a larger context in terms of our bylaw enforcement. Definitely with respect to some of the issues around Councillor Armstrong bringing up around capacity. I don't think that we can necessarily say we want stricter enforcement on these set of bylaws without understanding the capacity issues where it may impact some of our resources being spent on monitoring our parks around homelessness and that sort of thing. So I do think it warrants a greater discussion, and the context needs to be provided in order for council to make a responsible and appropriate decision.
Councillor Thorpe.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I know it doesn't take a lot, but now I'm getting confused. We seem to be, if I'm not mistaken, dealing with a motion on the table to defer, or should I say refer, the topic raised in this notice of motion to a Governance and Priority Committee. And I heard the Mayor, Your Worship, indicate that you would prefer to keep it as a specific topic as mentioned in the notice of motion. I personally agree with that. I'm hearing from Councillor Brown, I think, that he's in favor of a referral for a more general discussion, which I think we need to have at some point, but I think we need to be clear on what we're voting on when we vote on this referral. So I am in favor of a referral of this specific topic as worded in the notice of motion, which has been changed, and let's deal with that. And at some future GPC, when staff are better prepared, we can deal with a more general discussion of bylaws and philosophy behind bylaws. But I don't think we need to open that huge can of worms tonight or even in the near future. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
I believe we did have, through you, Your Worship, to Council, I believe that we did have an earlier discussion today at the GPC where we were being asked about potential topics and bylaws was one that was brought up. And I think that there's no time like the present to set a date to have that discussion. I think it does give staff ample time to prepare something if we give them the proper direction of what to prepare, which I think that, yeah, with a little bit of added direction, could give the scope of maybe a slightly larger discussion around bylaws, understanding capacity, and what direction we want to go, so that we're not dealing with one-off notices of motion on a specific bylaw to enforce it or not when we don't have the larger picture of what our capacity is. And so I personally would like that information, and I think that the October 28th GPC is a great time to do it.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Brown and Councillor Gesselbrock. I think it's an important decision, because I would like to bring forward all the graffiti in the city. It's out of control. But I do know what's their workload, right? So if we're all going to start having things that we all think is important, I think we need to know what their capacity is. And then we as a council have to sit and say, okay, sidewalks is going to be their priority, or, snow work clearing, or we're going to vote on, is it going to be graffiti? I think that is a really important discussion, because I think all of us have issues surrounding bylaws that are very important to us, but I do not believe, and this is just my belief, that there's the staff capacity to deal with them all. So that's why I brought up this morning, I would like to have the bylaws brought forward to GPC. I think that this particular motion could be dealt with separately at the GPC and then have a broader discussion after this motion is discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to repeat myself, but that's not unusual. We were counseled early on in our term by Mr. Cuff about first heard deferred. we had a notice of motion before us tonight that has now been, with great respect, substantially changed. We're now having moved from a discussion of the contents of that motion respecting shoveling sidewalks and trimming trees to a broad discussion of the whole enforcement of our bylaw process, and God knows how many bylaws we have, and I don't pretend to know the number, nor can I tell you the specific number of city staff. So with great respect, there is a motion to defer the discussion of this motion to the GPC. We have the agreement of the seconder. It's by consent. We have had ample discussion. I'm going to suggest we vote on that motion. All those in favor to defer? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. I think thank you, Councillor Brown.
Yes, the motion that a staff report and presentation be prepared for a Governance and Priorities Committee that provides an overview of the bylaw enforcement function, a breakdown of the annual enforcement budget and revenues and how this compares to other similar municipalities, and the general bylaw enforcement policy of the City of Nanaimo.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hemmons.
I'll speak to that quickly. I think we've had a lot of discussion, but Mr. Mayor, your comments there around not knowing how many enforcement officers we have and the number of bylaws, to me, sort of reinforce this idea that we do need that context in order to make responsible decisions. We know if staff are going to be working on this, they're working on a business case. Some of that work is already being done. So it seems that this might be like a timely discussion for us to have that conversation, and especially in light of, you know, sort of the one-off comments I've heard a lot of council making and the community making around our bylaw. And I totally echo Mr. Manner's comments that this is not to be critical of staff by any means. It's actually to sort of take a little bit deeper dive and figure out what is our enforcement policy? Is council happy with it? And if we do want to change it, how do we enable staff to meet that?
Mr. Rudolph, Mr. LaBerge, I don't care who answers it or can provide advice on this. Given the wording of Councillor Brown's motion, are we looking at a minimal, moderate, substantive amount of staff time involved in this?
So, Your Worship, I've tried to speak 3 times and I'm not been able to get your attention.
You've succeeded Councillor Bonner's role at the table.
There's a number of issues here. So the answer is the bylaw enforcement group is doing a business plan, which is to be submitted as part of council's consideration of programs this fall later on. So that draft of that will be available in the near future. So we'd be in a position to share that, and it's intended to identify you know, the resources, the issues, and all that type of thing. So I think we are in a position to supply you with an overview, but there's more to it than just the bylaw department. This would take an input from legislative services and so on. To do it right, to give you the complete package, I think you need to see the whole thing. And there's things like fees and charges and so on. So to give you the complete picture, I think we can do that. But it would probably be in October. We have a couple of dates, so we'd work towards that if that was your goal. I wanted to just say, and I would have said this earlier, just in terms of a practice, in terms of notices of motion, and your conversation is verifying this point. It would be better to have a referral to staff for to get all these answers when you receive a notice of motion, as a matter of typically where it's going to alter service levels or it's going to change the bylaws or some. As a practice, I would recommend that you ask that it be referred back for a staff report, and then it could come back. In this case, it could be the very specific staff report could come here, or it could be deferred to GPC. And any subsequent notices of motion, I would ask that you think of those consequences so that you're making sure you're furnished with all the necessary information to make an informed decision about the intended and unintended consequences of these notices of motions. And there's been a number of them, and I would just say as a general practice, that's good policy. Sometimes it may be so simple it's not necessary, but where you have a sense of implications that extend beyond maybe what your current understanding of the problem is. In this case, there would be presumably financial, well, there might be. There's a lot of issues attached to this, and I just wanted myself to get that information so we could make sure that you were informed. So in moving forward, I'd suggest that we have consideration for, as a practice, we would refer it to staff. If there's an appetite to refer it to staff for a report, fine. If not, fine. In this case about doing a general session on GPC, as it was noted, we do have 2 or 3 or maybe even more opportunities to set a session up in October for this, and we would be in a position to come to you and give you an overview of that. So that would be this issue nested in a bigger conversation, the way I would understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I have no desire to prolong this discussion, but I want to thank Mr. Rudolph for his comments, and I appreciate them, and I agree with them. And I think this comes down to part of our strategic goal of good governance. It's part of that in our processes, which we're still struggling with, and that's, that's fine, that's to be expected. But maybe this conversation could be part of the GPC, which we have already set aside for discussion on governance issues. I'm never comfortable with motions on the fly, and I respect Councillor Brown's intent with his suggested motion, and I certainly agree that I would love to see a general discussion of everything related to bylaws at some point in time. I'm not convinced we need a motion, to be honest, because I think Mr. Rudolph is hearing that that's a prime topic for a future GPC, and as soon as staff is prepared to bring that forward, along with the report that's already in progress, I'm understanding, then we can have that. So I don't disagree with the intent of the motion, but I'm honestly not sure that it's necessary.
If I may comment, seeing no other speakers, I'm going to vote against this motion for the very simple reason that as much as I am never opposed to a good deep dive at the appropriate time of year, preferably in the summer when it's a little warmer, as opposed to approaching the fall and the winter when we have enough to do, it seems to me that we've already heard from Mr. Rudolph that there is a business plan coming forward. It will give us an opportunity for further discussion. The deferral of Councillor Bonner's motion will provide an opportunity for discussion. I am not prepared to interfere with what is already a busy and fulsome agenda for this council, as laid out in various discussions, including finalizing a budget before the end of the year, to look at all of this when we have an official community plan coming ahead of us and a number of other items. I appreciate and respect the suggestion and the impetus for the discussion, and that's always appreciated. But, there's a time to do things right, and I just don't see that there is a reasonable amount of time to do this without imposing on staff and bringing forward a matter on the agenda, which is, with great respect, pressing when it comes to the winter. I get it, but we're going to deal with that specifically. But in terms of the overall concept of enforcement, if I wanted to have a fulsome discussion on that, I'd want to know what Langley's doing, I'd want to know what Victoria's doing, I'd want to know what a whole series of other municipalities are doing, and perhaps other provinces, and whether the legislation is similar. If I'm going to make those kinds of decisions, I want a lot of effort out of the staff, which I already see as overburdened. So I will be voting against the motion. Councillor Martman, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Through you, may I have the motion read to me again?
Absolutely. And you'll notice there's no date. That a staff report and presentation be prepared for Governance and Priorities Committee that provides an overview of the bylaw enforcement function, a breakdown of the annual enforcement budget and revenues, and how this compares to other similar municipalities, and the general bylaw enforcement policy of the organization.
Thank you. In view of that I've heard from Mr. Rudolph that some of this planning is taking place, etc., I will support the motion.
Councillor Armstrong.
I would just like to know if it's appropriate, if Mr. LaBerge thinks that there's no time associated to it though, right? So it could be done at a later date, or we could wait till we hear after we get the information that's coming forward for budget. Is that correct?
Your Worship, just to clarify, what Mr. LaBerge is preparing is a business plan for the Bylaw Enforcement Services Group, not a huge review of all bylaws and that type of thing. Ms. Gurry is simultaneously putting together a business case for a long-term systematic review of all our bylaws, and policies, which would be over the next 2 to 3 years. So there's a bigger, broader thing that deals with fees and charges. So there's a broader issue there. But in terms of being able to deliver the current capacity and some of the issues and challenges and resources around the bylaw enforcement function, we could bring that to you. But it wouldn't necessarily match what I'm hearing might be the expectations of the depth of research that you may be looking for. But, that's kind of what the GPC is for, is to have conversations about topics. But we could start that narrative if there is a discussion, if that's something that council agrees to. So, in other words, we can cover some of the ground.
Just follow up then. I'm cognizant of what the mayor said, and I saw Dave thinking that he can't do it in the near future. So I'm going to actually be voting against and wait until we have the conversation at the GPC, see the budget item that comes before us, and then maybe make a decision after that, because I do agree with the mayor. We've got budget. We haven't even tackled the OCP, and that's supposed to be done by charter. It's not even started. So yeah, as much as I agree with the intent of it, because I do believe it needs to happen, but I saw his head when that was made, so I will be voting against. Thank you.
I think it's time to call the question. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Duly noted, motion passes. Question period. Ms. Snellgrove. Mr. Manners, 9B and looks like 121.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Bill Manners from Nanaimo. I have a couple questions. It's regarding the downtown Nanaimo key opportunities. The council approved the quick wins as presented in the staff report. My question is about the redevelopment of key sites, which is to work with BC Assessment to ensure that vacant and unutilized property in the downtown core be assessed at the highest and best use of value. The question that I have is this discussion that's going to be had going to be fair to all property owners? For example, we have the property known as A and B Sound, which is probably taxed at a lot lower rate than it should be. We have across the street the property that Rick Hine manages that is being worked on to the best of their ability. Is that going to be taxed at the maximum value, or is it going to be taxed at the value that it's currently worth, which is less? A few years ago, we had a property on Nicholl Street that was assessed at the maximum value for fire evaluation, and it was determined that over 95% of the value of the property was burnt, whereas in actuality it was about 5% of the actual building envelope. So my question again is this discussion going to bring those values into account?
I'll take it.
Councillor Armstrong.
I don't believe we can do that. I think BC Assessment is stuck by rigid rules and regulations, and I don't think we're going to be able to budge that. That's my viewpoint. I wasn't at that meeting, but my understanding is that they've got set criteria that they must follow. It's set in legislation, and I don't believe that we're going to be able to come in and say, oh no, we think that this guy can build a restaurant which is going to generate this amount of money. I don't believe that happens. I don't think, as a matter of fact, we asked that question of the fellow that was there, and he said it can't be done. So I don't think that's a quick win, because I don't think it can happen.
For what it's worth, Mr. Manners, I think Councillor Armstrong is right.
Thank you, and if council would allow me, I have a question regarding the GPC. Can I go ahead? It's a quick question.
In a spirit of indulgence tonight, absolutely.
Thank you. One thing that I've noted since the GPC started, the starting times for the meetings have been, and this is in order since they started, 1 p.m., noon, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 9 a.m., 3 p.m., 1 p.m., 1 p.m. Today was 2 p.m., and the next one is 1 p.m. Can we please have a set time for GPC meetings? There are a lot of people in the community that cannot make it to meetings during the daytime. Myself, I have asked for the day off so that I can attend them. But not knowing what time the meetings are ahead of time can be tough.
I'll take that.
Councillor Armstrong?
I'll take, one of the problems is it depends on whatever agenda items are. A lot of times if we have guest speakers coming in or people, we work around their schedule, which could be 9 in the morning, or around some of our council schedules because somebody might not be available. I mean, it's a business. We can't always have set hours. We have to work around those that do it. I myself would love to just come in at 7. I'm not a morning person. But, you know, we have to work around our schedules and how long our meetings are. Some we know are only going to be an hour, some might be 2 or 3 hours. There's times when we run out of time and we're rushing to make it down here in time just to get to it. So it's really difficult. That's my answer. Somebody else?
Councillor Martman?
Thank you. And through the use of technology, if you do work during the day, they are live streamed. Or stream-lived, or whatever it's called.
You can't watch it when he's working though.
Thank you.
No, but
Which
you
is
can
something
watch
that
it
I would
later.
ask for consideration on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manners. Steve Burry, 10F1.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. My name is Steve Burry. I'm a resident of the Old City, but I'm not asking about that tonight. You'll probably be happy to know. I have concern over the traffic and bylaw amendment that was passed today. I appreciate the amendment is well-intentioned, and as my teenage daughter and her mother both use a wheelchair, I personally will benefit from increased access to a parkade. However, I am concerned that it was done without consultation of the minority group affected, and even knowing that, thanks to Mr. Brown's question, council forged ahead. I can imagine several other options available which would prevent abuse of parkade disability use rather than eliminating the parking benefit entirely. Consultation would have permitted a more nuanced solution to this problem. A change affecting a protected minority group should not be made without consulting the affected minority group. My question is, will council give consideration to directing staff in future to consult affected minority groups when bringing forward recommendations directly affecting those groups? Thank you. Do I get an answer?
Councillor Brown?
Yes, I think you raise an excellent question, and I think as a city we need to make more of an effort to be inclusive and have voices that typically aren't represented in decision-making due to a variety of reasons, make that decision-making more accessible. So I personally would like to see moving forward us. And I can't speak to any sort of timelines or any sort of direction, but I would like to see something I've advocated before. I know Councillor Armstrong has advocated for it before as well. Is a committee dedicated to, I look around at other jurisdictions, and Vancouver is a great example of an access. I don't know the proper name right now, but I think it used to be the Accessibility Committee, where they make sure those voices are heard and that consultation happens, even on issues that might seem minor. So I think it's a great question and a great concern, and something I hope we will address more fully and wholesome in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berry. I think that's it for responses. Seconded. Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone.